All right. Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining yet another Ecstasy Hustle Hour live session. Um, what I first of all would like to say is thank you to our wonderful guests for all being here. We have wonderful people with us. I'm just going to close the second screen. Wonderful. I just want to thank you all for tuning in for yet another Ecstasy Live session, Hustle Hour. It's time on Friday afternoon, at least in Central European time. Today, we're going to chat about a very, very interesting but also important topic. And we have wonderful experts with ourselves joining here today, where we'll be speaking about Web3 and media. Before, I'm going to properly introduce all our wonderful guests, including Karina, Junit, Alexandros, and Nadia. I'm going to quickly give you an overview of what we're going to speak about today, but also I want, we are hosting this Astral Labs. I quickly wanted to make you aware that we have also something wonderful on the table. So just to start, what are we speaking about today? Indeed, Web3 and media. I think that most of us working in Web3 space, or if you're enthusiastic about the Web3 space, we have been involved with media in one way or the other, right? Maybe each day you're reading the news. Perhaps you're producing a podcast yourself. Maybe you love interviewing people about this space. Whatever it really is that you're interested about, or maybe that you're working with professionally, Web3 and media touches us all in this very space. And there's a lot that can be said about that. That's why we have editors with us today. We have authors with us today. We have people who have launched even media platforms with us today. And indeed, podcast hosts as well. And academics, professionals, we have a lot of interesting people amongst ourselves today. Of course, today, the session that we are hosting, it's part of Ecstasy. As you might notice, we have a lot of women in our midst, apart from Alexandros. That is because, of course, as Field Labs, we're trying to host these Ecstasy sessions, which are really meant to empower women in the Web3 business space. But of course, we are inclusive, and men, especially wonderful men such as Alexandros, are welcome as well to join our various sessions. And I know that a lot of people, indeed, men, women, however you identify, are all watching. So you're all very, very welcome. What I really quickly wanted to mention, really, really quickly, because we have a full program of very interesting questions and hopefully dialogues and answers today, is that Astral Labs, we have a couple of ticket giveaways that are undergoing, right? September, October, it's all very, very busy months. So I just wanted to quickly mention, right? It can be that you are in or around Italy, Frankfurt, Germany, maybe you are in Poland. Just be aware that we have ticket giveaways for ETH Warsaw, ETH Milan, Napoli ETH, also in Italy, and Web's Week happening in Frankfurt, where I believe both Alexandros and Karina are actually speakers, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, if you're interested to potentially join and win free tickets, again, it's all free. Let us know and we will enter you in the draw. Finally, just to quickly mention, we've done also a very recent big giveaway for 3 tickets for Token 2049 in Singapore. And yeah, I just want to quickly mention that if you are interested in a discount code, we have it. It's called Thrilled15. We don't earn from any referrals or commissions, but I did want to quickly mention that to you in case you still need a ticket. At least, we can save some money because yes, we are in a bull market, but still not everyone is rich in this space. So might be useful. So yeah, that brings me back to properly introduce our guests. What we usually do is that I actually ask each and every one of our guests to introduce themselves. But just because we have a full program today, and we will for sure get to know a lot more about what you're up to in this very space, what I would actually do is quickly mention whilst I close this very window. Let me just close this very window right here. What I would quickly do actually is welcome each and every one of you. Let's have a look here. Alrighty. I would quickly mention here that we are indeed joined by 4 wonderful people. As I said, professionals in the Web3 space. First of all, on our right hand, we have Nadia. Nadia is the founder of Ad Lunum. She is also a podcast host, indeed, of wonderful live sessions that are hosted quite frequently on X called The Future of NFTs. Then she's also a co-founder of Altcoin Observer. I think we will hear a little bit more about that later. And we are super curious about this. Whatever you can disclose, we are all ears. Later, you are also producing a Web3 documentary, as far as I've understood. Alongside Nadia, we are joined by Karina. She is a wonderful tech journalist, as well, a producer of the Shy Tech Swiss podcast as well. Wonderful, can be found on YouTube. She is also a business developer of a wonderful project in the Web3 space that is called World's Metaverse, I think, but I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly. Karina, feel free to correct me later on. And of course, a frequent Web3 event panelist. Alongside Nadia and Karina, we're also joined by Alexandros. Now, this is very interesting because Alexandros is the founder of a Web3 consultancy firm called Alex on Chain. Fundamentally, though, he's also a guest lecturer. We will mention and notice this definitely later on. And he is an author, for instance, of a book on smart contract programming. It's forthcoming, if I'm not mistaken, next year. And we're very, very, very proud to have you here with us, Alex, as well today. And finally, last but not least, someone very important. I'm so happy that you could make it, Guneet. You are not only an editor at Cointelegraph, but, and this is very interesting, you're also pursuing a doctorate in data science with a specific focus on CBDCs. And you are also both an author and an editor of several academic books. And of course, finally, least indeed and last, my name is Alex and I'm the founder and CEO of Trilled Labs. Now, having said that, enough monologue from my end. What I would very much like to ask each and every one of you, right? You have been working in one way or the other in Web3 and media, as I said, either as authors, journalists, podcast hosts, documentary makers. You've even maybe launched media firms. Most of you wear also different hats in this space. Now, that brings me actually to the first question, and I will have to unmute you for this in a second. What is it that initially drew you to the really intersection of Web3 and media? And if you have maybe a tip for everyone who is watching and they are maybe keen to get exposure media-wise in this space, what would you recommend them? So yeah, what brought you to the space? And if you have any tips, let me just actually unmute you. Let's just work on alphabetic order. Would you like to start, Karina? Or sorry, Alexandros. Alexandros, you're first. Let me just unmute you. Here you go. Welcome.
Thank you. So what drew me in, in the intersection of media and Web3 is the fact that, as a young, when I was young, well, I'm still young, I hope, but when I was a kid, I always liked seeing, journalists basically, and I always saw them as people who are looking for the truth, let's say. And I was seeing it, but at the same time, you kind of see that corporate journalism is quite corrupt, I think. And during that time when I was a kid, the internet started becoming a thing, and I also started seeing citizen journalists, let's say, uh, started popping up, because you also started having iPhones, let's say, and people were able to take their iPhone or take something really cheap, let's say, even, and just go outside and start becoming a citizen journalist, basically, right? Because the only thing you have a microphone in your iPhone, you have a camera, and that basically helps you to become a citizen journalist. And looking at Web3, that's something that I also really like in terms of governance, in terms of transparency. And I always found that these two things, digital citizen journalism and Web3, if they would basically merge, they would be able to create a really powerful media landscape that is much better than what we have currently in traditional media, or legacy media, as I like to call them, let's say.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you for bringing immediately such interesting thoughts to the table. Of course, we are also quite keen to learn from the rest of you. Karina, what would you have to add from your end? I'll just unmute you. Yeah, you're perfect. Perfect. Please go.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that very well. First of all, I would like to thank you for being here.
It's not perfect. Let's.
All right. Now it works?
Yes, this is great. Thank you so much.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm holding the phone. So because we were talking about iPhone and we were talking about
the digitalization and how the media coverage is so important. I think that for me, what drew me to the Web3 space is definitely having more freedom, because as it was mentioned before, working for these labels like CNN or the BBC, it's definitely a more controlled space where it's definitely based on political incentives or based on financial incentives. So it's definitely not a very free driven space. But I always wanted to be a very creative person, and I always wanted to be a journalist. So what drew me to this space is definitely contributing with a lot of information, especially when it comes to explaining that complexity to the audience, because I think that we have a lot of mixed information when we're coming across all sorts of social media, when we're coming across any sort of article. I think that's one of the greatest misconceptions is probably about the Web3 space. So one of my ideas was actually to create this podcast called SciTech Swiss, where I also had the pleasure of interviewing Alexandra on her Thrilled Labs. And I think that it's very important to contribute, even if it's a small, a small contribution. It can definitely be significant to this space. And I definitely wanted to contribute on this kind of education space. So definitely I was very driven by the innovation and by what it's really holding on the future, on the governance. I think that there's like a lot of complexity on this topic that we're going to explain later, but probably this is one of the main reasons, like the innovation and the creativity as a storyteller.
Massive. Well, that's absolutely wonderful. Thank you for adding that. And now, of course, Gunit, someone else who very much contributes in different ways. What brought you initially to the Web3 and media kind of sector, and what would you add from your end? And thank you so much for joining as well.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I think it's a one-word answer for me. It's my passion for research. And I think as the market is like very, very immature and there's a lot to dig deeper. And that's why I was very interested into this space. And when I first heard about Bitcoin and its contribution to the fintech space, that's what drew me to the space. And the second part of your question, that the tip for others, that how they can explore the Web3 media space, or they can secure the media coverage. I think two things are very important. One is transparency, and other one is being honest. But I think people who have joined, or even maybe you, maybe ask me that Web3 is often, described as trustless. So where does this trust thing or transparency things comes from? I think regardless of anything in the media space, and in a settings where you need media coverage, you need to be honest and transparent about your intentions, your communication, and your data. So that's why these two things are very important. And once you prove that you are reliable enough, everybody will come after you, not that you have to come after people to cover you.
Wow, can I just say, I could have also said that, like, quite literally. You've mentioned so many different things, and about the whole transparency and trustless part, right? These are topics we will be hopefully digging deeper into. But it's wonderful that you already bring that to the table so early on. Now, Nadia, not yes, last but not least, we would love to also learn a little bit more about your thoughts, right? Because you're also quite prominent in this very space. You do a lot. What brought you initially to the Web3 and media space? And is there something else that you would like to add from your end?
I think I've never answered a question this on point, because it's quite literally media that brought me into Web3. Are you able to hear me? Yes. Great. So I was working in marketing in the pharma industry, and took a career break, started traveling, knew nothing about blockchain. And then someone told me about a journalist opportunity. Now, I'd never worked as a journalist formally, but it was a childhood dream because I'd done it at school. And since I didn't need to do this, as a formal career, I was like, cool, I'll give it a go. And it happened to be in blockchain, which I knew absolutely nothing about. I'd heard about Bitcoin in 2012, and I decided back then it's far too complex for me. And one day when it's, idiot proof, I will understand it too. And so I think, my entire introduction to blockchain and to decentralized technologies was through media. And that was such an incredibly good foundation and basis. because I think what it allowed me to do, and especially this was back in 2017, so back then it was much more of a focus on self-sovereign identity and decentralization, and the trustlessness aspect of it. I think we've steered away a bit from that focus, and so if you come in later, you wouldn't necessarily have the same sort of nostalgia on the past, when we still had this utopian kind of belief that this was the thing that was going to fix it all. But of course, coming in via the media, I had to keep more objectivity. And so I think I trained myself in the Web3 space right from the beginning to both understand that I'm learning about solutions to problems I didn't know existed. And that education has continued. And I think that's true for everyone that comes into Web3, which is why the media plays such an important role. Really understanding that there are problems that you didn't know existed, but there are solutions also that you didn't know existed. But then also, being, I think, a bit more level-headed in the sense, if you're a journalist, you have to be objective. You can't believe the best and you can't believe the worst, because you can't believe things. You need to go after the truth and the facts. And so I think for me, a driving force that I've taken out of that or away from that in the years since. So I started my career working as a journalist, worked for publications like Bitcoin.com, investing.com, Be in Crypto, these kind of publications, but then went back to my marketing roots. But I think what has remained with me, and now already, back in the media space, we have a media company as well, a Web3 media company. And so I think what I've taken away from that is, yes, this is a fantastic solution, Web3 technologies, blockchain. However, we are still very far from those early promises. And so if you are in Web3, whether you are building in Web3 or whether you are leveraging the technologies that Web3 offers, it's almost, that Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility, because we are very, very early. And so therefore, because we are so early, because things remain unregulated, it is our responsibility as builders and people who are passionate about this being the future to kind of build it in a way that, yes, it is the solution to the problems, and it doesn't just become yet another problem. Now it's a pseudo decentralized problem. So I think that line for me, is something I reflect on a lot, and that absolutely came from my media days. And so I think the media in Web3 plays a very, very big role in so many different aspects. But just wanted to also answer your question in terms of what someone can do if they want to get into media, for example. Actually, I think getting into media, as I think Alexandra's mentioned, citizen journalism is very, very strong in Web3, especially. It is probably one of the easiest entry points into Web3 with very low barriers to entry, because you can sit at your desk and you can start covering Web3 without being affiliated to a media organization, and you can build your own brand and therefore build your relationships with founders, build your relationship with media organizations. So this topic very much is something that I think is a low barrier to entry for people, even in the Web3 space. You don't need to understand it. As a journalist, it's your job to research it, on the job. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Thank you, actually, Nadia, for the wonderful intro about what you're up to, what brought you to the space. It started with, a quick to the point answer, but it's very, very clear that you have a lot of knowledge to bring to the table. And you introducing actually the topic of, the role of individuals in this space. That actually brings me to the first question, actually. And I want to get into, what is indeed the impact of Web3, first of all, on traditional media outlets, and indeed this very role of individuals. After that, I would love to speak a little bit more, almost like from a kind of like more realist perspective about the interests that are involved between Web3 media and money. Of course, we have to be a bit careful here. We all interact with media, but yeah, we should be transparent and honest too about the financial inputs, I would say. And then finally, what I would love to do later on is actually, if we still have time, I hope so, look at the intersections, specific verticals of Web3, such as NFTs, metaverse, and AI, and how this will really impact the future of media. But just to start with the very first one, you already introduced, Nadia, the impacts of individuals. Alex, I know that you are much voice in Web3. How do you think natives, if you want, can also really help bridge the knowledge gap between, on the one hand side, the Web3 community, all of us were kind of like quite into the space, and the general public? And fundamentally, yeah, what's your thought on that? Do you see that as a democratization almost of knowledge, of media, or almost like as a threat? Because however, where individuals are prominent, they do have certain potentially responsibilities and whatnot. Let me just unmute you. Oh gosh, it's hard to do and the moderating and the panel at the same time. Please take it away.
Sure. One of the things that I've always thought about is that, in Web3, we always talk about mass adoption, about, BlackRock coming and all of these things. And I also have seen many, Web3 natives and let's say big, well, for crypto standards, big companies wanting, Financial Times to cover them, The Economist to cover them, all of these major, outlets. And I think it's a major mistake to do that, because instead of trying to persuade or focus on legacy media, let's say, to cover Web3 in a more sophisticated way, because most of the times when you go to legacy media, they do not really portray Web3 in a good way. They don't necessarily need to portray it in a good way, but they always portray it most of the times in a bad way anyway. So they don't have even a middle ground, let's say. But what I would say Web3 natives can do, let's say, if you're, let's say, for instance, a company, start talking and, start collaborating with citizen journalists that are either, crypto native, or sometimes they do not even necessarily need to be crypto native, but they have a substantial following, let's say. For instance, some of these collaborations or examples could be, I'm like, for instance, Michael Schellenberger, Matt Taibbi, all of these people that are much more digitally oriented, much more citizen journalists oriented, let's say, and they could sponsor, let's say, some of their programs. They could ask them to create a certain section where they start educating people about cryptocurrencies, or at least their viewers. These people have much more, they have a bigger reach than many legacy media, because if you look at their followings, it's in the millions on Twitter, let's say, and every single post that they get are several thousand, several hundreds of thousands of views, let's say. So that would be a better way of I've always thought that would be a better way of approaching Web3, let's say, in terms of community and everything, because then you can basically educate the community of those journalists, but at the same time, you can bring then these journalists to talk in your Web3 native events about things that the Web3 community also cares about, for instance, transparency, censorship resistance, and all of these things, because many of these journalists are also getting censored on social media. So there are a lot of topics there which can be added, let's say, as topics in events that could be talked about and that align with blockchain technology in general, and that would basically bring new people as well. But it would be also a cheaper way of educating people, of course, as well. And of course, at the same time, they do not necessarily need to go to the, let's say, big citizen journalists, but you can also go to smaller ones, upcoming ones, of course, as well. And you can also go on Substack, let's say, find people that have a following, let's say, and they're quite serious in what they're doing. See if you can somehow collaborate with them and build a community like this, let's say. And in a way, democratizes information, because you do not go back to the legacy media, which are closed, let's say, and they have a very narrow way of seeing things. But you decentralize it by going to many, many other citizen journalists that cover and talk about and educate the general public and help bridge this divide, let's say. Does it make sense what I said?
Yes, it does make sense, Alex. Absolutely. I must say that I'm happy that you also finalize your sentence with legacy media, because actually I've been planning to ask another question about this, and that is, Gunit, I would love to learn from you. I know you're very passionate about this topic, right? How things are perceived. What do you feel about those traditional media outlets out there? And why do you think that sometimes they really seem to ignore or see crypto through such a negative lens? Do you have any thoughts about this? Oh, let me just unmute you. Yes, here you go. Boom.
Yeah, I think because I mostly see like what others are covering and what Cointelegraph is covering, and then compare their lens actually. I would like to also give the most recent example of Telegram's co-founders arrest as well. But first of all, I'll just start with the reasons that I think that why traditional financial media always shy away from the crypto coverage. I think that has to more do with the volatility, scams, and illegal activities happening in the space, like very, very frequently on an everyday basis. But then I think that that's also part of traditional financial system as well. That happens everywhere where there is a finance. These things will, keep happening. But I think that has to do with the frequency of happening these things in the crypto media, that they always, shy away from covering the crypto news, or even if they want to cover that, they like to portray it in a more negative sense, rather than being a neutral and balanced narrative. So I was doing some research on the Telegram thing, because we were to produce like a few education kind of articles on Telegram, like about its protocol, or about its privacy and security features. So I happened to came across an article it was from 2016. I won't say about who covered it, but the title says why you should stop using Telegram right now. That was the headline of the article. And when I read that article, I could clearly see that how they have misinterpreted the various privacy and security features like secret chats and other things offered by Telegram, and how negatively they have portrayed Telegram. So whosoever is reading that article and is like a frequent Telegram user might feel that, okay, this is something they shouldn't do. And on the other hand, if same thing would happen with WhatsApp or other like messengers like Facebook, they would not use these headlines. They would say, okay, WhatsApp's encryption features, then hyphen, then what do you think about it? So it's a more like a balanced narrative, rather than clearly saying that you should right away stop using the particular app like Telegram. And another thing I feel is jargon. There's a lot of jargon in the blockchain space, crypto space, and some of the journalists, they don't understand things, and they try to misinterpret things in a certain way, and that's why they try to make their narrative towards only the negative sense. And this was like just a recent Telegram example that I saw, and most of the time I have also seen that whenever, for example, any crash happened in the Bitcoin space, the Web3 media always covers like a dual narratives. For example, why the crash happens, and then also, for example, if Bitcoin is crashing, then Cointelegraph and other companies will cover why it is crashing, and then on the other side, some positive stuff like how Bitcoin acts as a saving technology, or why its scarcity is important. But if you see like same things happening in the traditional media, Financial Times and others, they will always say why you shouldn't use Bitcoin, and all those bad things. So yeah.
Yes. You brought, I love how you just immediately connected it. It's clear that you are a journalist, right? Immediately connecting the current question to what's happening this week. I love your analytical lens here. What you said about Telegram, right? And about the messages and encryption. Actually, this is quite an important thing really to consider, right? Even if we are using such things like social media or messaging platforms, like who has access to those very messages? Can it be obtained easily by governments, or indeed through data leaks and whatnot? In fact, this is something that we're currently at Trilled Labs, because we also are obviously a messaging platform. We're currently really discussing encrypting everything, like as much as possible, but it's not easy. And a lot of work and money actually goes into that. But that is just a side note. Well, Gunit, thank you so much for providing us with a couple of different insights in that regard. Let me just move very, very quickly as well to Karina, because Karina, we haven't heard so much from you yet, but I know that you feel very, very strongly about journalism. You are a journalist by nature. How do you feel that Web3 technology has impacted, if we can call it, the traditional models of journalism, specifically in terms, let's say, of content creation, of distribution, of monetization? What are your thoughts about this as a real dedicated journalist that you are today? Let me unmute you. Yeah, please go ahead. We can't hear you so well.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, so for question, I will.
I think it would be great if you can try to pick up the phone again.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the wonderful question. I definitely agree with what everyone mentioned about the Web3 media and about the scams and about all the risk of misinformation. That's also one of the topics that it's very close to me, to do always research of what you're actually writing about. And I think that one of the things that I really admire about the Web3 space, and especially about the media as a journalist, is probably to allow everyone to be creative, but in their own words, in their own space, and creating this kind of safe space where everyone could actually do it on their own terms. And there are a few platforms that I have on my mind. For example, when I think about the NFT Now platform, where everyone could actually write their content, and they could probably think we can even talk about tokenized media, or another way of distribution. Because when we're thinking about the subscription models, when we're thinking about CNN, when we're thinking about all these kind of platforms in a Web2 space that we are experiencing right now, we are definitely experiencing a different part of the web, and we're definitely experiencing a totally different way of reading the news or content creation. And definitely, I think that in this kind of space, we are not just going to talk about journalism, but also about the content creation part. And we'll have a lot of influencers like Kobe probably educating people, educating the mass of people about the Web3 space, and also very much what also other podcasters are doing, translating this kind of complexity of the media into simple terms. And when we're thinking about these kind of major outlets, definitely we will have like a massive change, definitely when it comes to the revenue of the control. Because when we're thinking about the traditional media, we are thinking about people who are we're thinking about third parties who are actually owning the media, right? But when we're thinking about other platforms like, for example, Mirror XYZ, I think it's the name of the platform. It's allowing, for example, other users to contribute with their piece of media, and to also mint NFTs as a part of media. So when we're thinking about the contrast with the traditional media, we're thinking about these users who are going to have more control of what you're going to publish, of the creative process. And definitely we'll have also other podcast creators, like, for example, Kobe, as I was discussing before, the Up Only podcast. I could also name a few. And I think that it's also very important to connect with the public. And we will definitely talk about engaging, and also about the way that we will the way that we will engage with our platforms, but also the way that we will reward our audience. That's also very important. And I think that the Web3 space is definitely offering more innovation and more incentives in this kind of space. And I think that definitely this will bridge the gap of what we have in the traditional media and also in the Web3 space. And I think that it's definitely allowing ourselves to have like more freedom of what we're going to publish. But at the same time, I think that what we can take from the traditional media, it's definitely this part of the research, this part where we'll have to double check all the information when we are talking about these platforms like Grayscale, for example. When we are publishing something on the media, we always have to be very careful of the research part. That's one of the most important things to double check. But at the same time, I think that the way that we are connecting with people, with the audience, that's what is going to stay. Because when we are talking about the media, that it's obviously a great responsibility to be a journalist, and also the way that you're addressing to your audience, we have somehow to be very careful about the regulations. I think that's one of the topics that I also want to mention, that definitely when nowadays we are talking about the risks also of implementing AI in our services or in the Web3 space and this kind of incentives, we have to be careful also at the misinformation part, but also about how we are going basically to make it a safer space. And by that is definitely by introducing regulations.
I love that you bring such a comprehensive analysis immediately to the table, and thank you for that. I know that we have a big group today, so unfortunately we cannot go on for hours and hours, but I feel that we could definitely actually do that, because you all bring why I wanted to invite each and every one of you is because you all have such different backgrounds, but on the other hand side, I sense that you're very aligned in how much you care about Web3 and about transparency, and in fact about information sharing, right? So that brings me, actually, you have already mentioned the topic of incentives, and we have touched upon financial interests to an extent already, and brings me actually to the second part of today's session, right? I would love to actually ask to Nadia, where we're thinking about independent journalism or journalism in general versus maybe financial interests. I think that we all know that Web3 is not really a stranger to hype or sometimes even misinformation. And I was quite curious to perhaps ask you, as a documentary maker, as someone who have launched a big media arm or a platform indeed for media, how do you think that hype really influences the credibility and maybe also the reliability of media coverage in this space? Or maybe do you think that is actually a non-topic that could also very much be?
I wish I could say that it's a non-topic. So Adlunum works in the investment space, in the IDO space. So, that's the most hype-driven period of a Web3 company's life. And so as much as I personally and professionally have a lot of problems, of course, with the problems that hype brings in Web3, the reality is, and this is not a reality that any one person or company is going to be able to change. I think this is an evolution that is going to happen over time. And honestly, I don't know quite what it's going to evolve into. The reality is that at the moment, investment in Web3 at the retail level is driven almost purely by hype. Now, I've been in the IDO space since 2017, and I've also seen a lot of evolutions there. But I think probably the best example is the one that we've had most recently, which is the meme coin explosion on Solana. And we've seen that, we've had this camp of the Bitcoin spot ETFs and now the Ethereum spot ETFs. And that's that very traditional institutional camp money that is coming into Web3. But on the other hand, if you go on crypto Twitter, or I guess crypto X now, you see a very different side of Web3. You don't see the spot ETF group. You see the people who, I can go on and on about stories that will shock anyone who does not work in Web3, and it shocks you also in Web3, but you almost get to the point where you become so used to these insane things happening that it's a new sort of normal. So what I'm getting at is, as much as I think it causes a lot of damage, both in the media, unfortunately, we do in Web3 have a culture of pay for play. And that does not exclude the media. If you have enough money, you can get covered by anyone, anywhere, for anything. Or if you know the right person. And that's the other reality. And I think retail investors over the years have savvied up to this, because we always tell them, do your own research, but then we don't tell them how to do it. Now, what I think they've learned over the years is, yes, just because company X is covered in media outlet Y does not mean they are legit. But that has been the kind of playbook that we followed. So I think what is happening is there's a lot of renegotiation taking place within the retail community, retail investment community, sorry, because I think people have crashed and burnt a lot. And I think this is probably the best place to point out that we have Web3 media, but Web3 media is not decentralized. Web3 media is a centralized idea. It's, for-profit companies that start I mean, including us, of course, we are also, all of us here are at some point for profit, right? And so the ultimate idea of decentralized technologies, let's say Bitcoin, as there's no one single entity that controls it. We don't have that kind of media. And so when we are talking about media, we always have to remind ourselves that, unfortunately, completely the same as in the traditional world, there's zero difference between the two. In the traditional world, also the media has, pay for play, maybe not to the same extent as Web3. So I think that the role of the media is very complex, and the role of hype is very complex. And so these two converge, and it causes even greater complexity. And then you throw institutional investment in the mix and retail investment in the mix. And there's a lot of ulterior motives in any space, and also in this space. But I think what is different about this space is that we, as an industry, have created for ourselves a North Star to follow. And we are almost always able to gauge how far we are from this North Star. It's almost like the American Constitution that says this is how the country is supposed to be run. And when it's not run that way, then you are able to kind of see how far off you are. So yeah, I think, based on the fact that we had our foundations in trustlessness and in decentralization, despite the fact that hype is not going away and that media is not going to become more decentralized for the most part, it is certainly something that we can all strive towards. And then when we see these things going wrong, then we're like, okay, I'm about 80 degrees off or 240 degrees off from, where North Star says I should be.
I love it. I love it. It's guys, thank you so much for being here today and bringing so many honest assessments to the table. It's absolutely lovely, and it's much appreciated of your time. Now, I don't want to enter here because there's so much more that we can bring to the table. But Alexandros, I know that you have mentioned earlier in this very session, you have already said something about corruption of legacy media. Now, if I don't paraphrase you, now what I would like to ask you, actually, let me also just unmute you here. If we indeed look very critical to Web3 media, and we can do that, right? Naja has already been doing that. I think we have all been very influenced by the idea of transparency and also being fair about financial interests as well. How prevalent do you think it is that sometimes, and quite often indeed, exposure in Web3 media is really driven by financial interests? And maybe even more interesting, do you think, what type of risks do you think that this potential kind of like pay for play culture poses to the whole systemic landscape? I'm sure that you have a lot of thoughts here to share. Maybe please take the floor.
Well, I think, as Nadia also said, that it's quite prevalent, of course. As long as you have money, of course, you can be covered by all media. But at the same time, I'm not, of course, you can be very critical. Okay, then for that, I suppose you can say the same for legacy media, but also for Web3 media, that it's the fact that, how should I say it? You are for a for-profit, basically, company, of course, and you have to increase your revenue, basically, somehow. So basically, it is quite prevalent to see, for instance, sponsored articles and all of these things where you, of course, have to pay in order to be seen there, of course. But at the same time, it's a way of how basically also the market in some ways, of course, and it's the one. But the thing is, it's also like it depends on how prevalent you want to make it. If it is if it is basically just to pay in order to be to give an interview, for instance, or to pay in order to have a sponsored article, for me, that's not as much, let's say, in terms of corruption. But there are cases, for instance, when Sam Bankman-Fried, before he went to jail, there was a story where he had bribed the CEO of the block, let's say. And these kinds of stories can come up with misleading content, the hype that we mentioned, miseducation, of course, as well, where you basically start promoting a certain type of doing things, or a certain uh, exchange, or any, let's say, product that you may necessarily know if it is reliable, like for instance with SBF and FTX, of course. But I think the biggest danger of when you extrapolate this and you expand financial incentives in order to maximize profit, is like the biggest threat, or the biggest, let's say, risk for me, is that you'll just copy paste what the traditional media is doing, let's say, with all the corporate interests, into a digital way. And in that case, what's the difference of JP Morgan paying, I don't know, Fox, let's say, and what's the difference of SBF or any other crypto billionaire, let's say, paying the blog or any other outlet for, um, let's say, biased reporting, perhaps, or any other thing? Like, it's just the same thing. You just really recreated the very same thing, but in a digital way. And that's, I think, like a very big risk. So that's why I'm always advocating that people focus on independent citizen journalists in order to get promotion, where you're basically just give money to someone who may necessarily not have who is not, let's say, on the level of Fox, obviously, in terms of um, budget, of course, but at the same time they have their own audience, and you can decentralize in such a way the media. It's not entirely decentralized, of course, but it's much more decentralized than what we have now, let's say. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. It absolutely does make sense. I think that that actually might bring us slowly, right? Because we have been speaking now a little bit about traditional media, about some financial interest. Of course, we cannot in depth and exhaustively discover all these topics due to the fact that we are in a big group, that we have limited time, but it does make sense. And it all brings, I think, a lot of interesting points to the table. And in fact, what we are going to do at Thrilled Labs is that we're going to make a wonderful summary from this session, and we're going to actually create, almost as a media company, a wonderful, hopefully impartial article about all the wonderful points that you've and we've touched upon today. But that is just a side remark. Now, what I would love to do right now is pose a next question actually to Gunit. Gunit, what I would love to ask you, I know that you're very interested as well in AI, right? Because we've kind of like been moving from impacts, right, of Web3 on traditional media. Then we've been moving a little bit more about different interests involved in terms of journalism and financial interest. But now, third of all, I would love to tap in for another 10, maybe maximum 50 minutes if no one has to escape, on the final intersection part of today's session. I would love to ask you actually a question about AI. I know you love this very topic as well. You're a researcher. So let me just unmute you and actually ask you. Here we go. If we think about Web3 verticals intersection with media and the very development of media, almost like in the future, but maybe also already today, how do you really perceive the role of AI, especially when it is kind of like enhancing Web3 tech? How do you think that AI can really transform the way that media content is created and distributed? Or perhaps there is something else AI-wise that you would like to bring to the table here?
Yeah, I think both AI and Web3 technologies, they are here to complement each other rather than, doing something on their own. Of course they do, but like they don't compete with each other, rather than they complement each other in many ways, that what I see. First of all, I think the AI has the potential to transform the media content, how it is created and how it is distributed among the people. And then I think AI can help tailor news articles and content recommendations to individual interest of the people. And while Web3 can ensure the transparency of that content, as well as how creators are fairly compensated. I see like if a few platforms already doing that, like BitTorrent and Steemit, although I have not personally used them. But I think these things are happening, but only to some extent. That Nadia already said that it's still like a pay for things everywhere, and it's not complete decentralization yet. So I think, but this synergy between Web3 and AI will also benefit more towards AI, because AI will have like a more data to provide like insightful insights to the Web3 part, so that they can make like the better decisions, and also like accurate recommendations based on the data collected by AI. But however, like we see that where there is a data, we see like privacy concerns also emerge. So if AI is using Web3 data without any complying with regulations, then the privacy issues also emerge. So I think to address these issues against the complex tech has to play a big role. The encryption methods like end-to-end encryptions and other stuff, of course, like they have to comply with all the privacy regulations, and also give users the complete freedom and control of their data through their privacy policies, be transparent about their privacy policy, how the data is collected, how they are using it, in terms of also like if they are providing that to third parties and all. I think all these things need to be in this line, that even if like they are complementing each other, they should, ensure the compliance with everything. Otherwise, I think we will see all those headlines why you shouldn't use this or that, and why you should stay away from this or that platform, and always focusing on the big names like WhatsApp and other stuff.
Yes. There's a lot to unpack actually in that answer, but we can't. But thank you so much for bringing that to the table. And I think, there's so much happening right now with AI, but also with different verticals. If you even want to consider them as verticals of Web3, right? We can consider them as whole different emerging sets of technologies, especially if we consider, for instance, as well, things like NFTs and indeed the metaverse, because those were other parts of the intersections that I would like to speak about. I think that Alex, you would like to add something quickly to the table. Please feel free to go ahead, and then I will move actually to Nadia and also Karina, because I would love to also ask you, ladies, about how you feel that metaverse and NFTs are kind of like intersection with the very development of the media. But let's circle back for a second to Alex. Please go ahead, Alex.
I think just to add on something that Gunit said, I think another thing that we will see with AI, unfortunately, in Web3, and generally news in general, is a lot of misinformation. Because one of the things that you could basically do with, okay, not now perhaps, because it's quite obvious, at least to me, when someone uses ChatGPT to write something, but when these tools become more sophisticated, one could write something, let's say something happens, let's say some piece of news happens, someone could write like, okay, this happened, basically write an article on this, but also add that this and this happened. And then basically what happens is that you have created a misinformation article, then you can put it out into the ether, let's say on the internet. And if it let's say blows up in some ways, then it will basically be, how should I say it, it will just propagate misinformation, obviously, right? But one way that this could also perhaps be solved is by having articles be NFT pieces, because then what will happen is that if the article is an NFT piece, then you can create an on-chain identity or an on-chain reputation system where the person that actually puts up these things, in the short term, of course, people will panic and they will say, okay, they might believe it. But after 2, 3, or 5 or 10 such articles this person propagates, let's say within social media and the internet, no one will believe him, because they will go, on chain, and they will say, okay, they have 10 NFTs or 10 articles which were not reliable, so no one's going to believe them, basically. So maybe that would be a way to counter it, let's say.
Yes, that is lovely, Alex. Of course, that is very, very important. And that maybe immediately brings me then, let me just start then with you, Nadia, because I know that you are quite frankly an expert on NFTs and their very development and everything that is being enabled by that. So let me just also mute everyone and then move to the next speaker. Nadia, what I would love to ask you, and actually the same question will afterwards go for Karina, because you are of course, we are all kind of like experts in lots of different ways. But what I would also love to ask you both is really, we see that NFTs and metaverse are now already becoming kind of like predominant in our current discussion, right? We flew very naturally from the future of Web3 and AI towards NFTs. Now, what I would like to ask you both, how do you see NFTs, Nadia and Karina, the metaverse, kind of like shaping the future of content creation and indeed of consumption as well? Anything that pops into your mind as experts in this very field that have not been noticed yet, mentioned yet? Let me start with you, Nadia, and I'll mute you. Please go ahead. Thank you.
So I'll start by saying what I'm an expert in is saying, remember, it's a technology. And remember, we are very early. So that's, I think, basically what NFTs come down to at the moment. You know, I think there's so much that can be said. And just for anyone watching this discussion right now, I always point this out. NFTs are not just art, monkey pictures. NFTs is something that represents digital value and ownership that is traceable. So, for example, if I own the recording to this talk tonight and I put that as I put that on chain as an NFT, that is something that I own, that anyone can see is mine. It originated with me. And so therefore, it doesn't mean that it only, bought a yacht club and weird little pictures that you see on Twitter. NFTs, genuinely, it's just a technology and it has so many different use cases. Now, when it comes to the promises versus the reality, that's why I always say we're incredibly, incredibly early. When we were talking earlier about the mainstream media, having this very negative bias, the other problem with that is it requires a lot of subtlety to be early and in a messy, chaotic state and still be able to keep a level head and understand these are the growing pains that we are going through right now, but this is all being worked out. And so I think the same applies to NFTs. Is it going to disrupt the future of content creation and media? There is a stream, there's a parallel stream. There's one in which I can say, yes, absolutely. There's another one in which I can say, hey, NFTs are dead. And if I say this to two people, they will both absolutely believe me. The one that believes that NFTs are dead, yes, they will be correct, because if you go on Twitter and you look at what people on Twitter understand as NFTs, it's the Bored Ape Yacht Club and it's the PFPs. And that we can see volumes are massively down right now. Digital art volumes are massively down because NFTs were up until now a hype-driven vehicle. Now, because of the 2021, proliferation of NFT hype, that's also why all the big brands started taking note and started coming on board. We've seen Starbucks, we've seen Nike, we've seen Reddit, we've seen pretty much, all the luxury brands. We've seen everyone try out NFTs. Has it been successful? No, I don't think so. Does that mean it's not going to be successful in future? No, I don't think so. I think we are very, very early, and people that are curious and innovative and are looking for answers to problems, they are the ones fiddling with NFTs right now. They are the ones experimenting, trying things out, and it fails and it fails and it fails. But because of all these failures over the years, we are slowly and steadily building up a basket case of use cases and utilities for which these technologies are perfect. However, caveat, what does NFTs represent? Value and ownership. Now, the average person doesn't really think that much about value and ownership. And so if we're going to onboard people onto NFTs, It's not the value and the ownership that we're going to sell them on. We need to give them exactly the same experience, as in not worse, than they are having on any website right now, on any platform right now. And the same goes for the metaverse. The metaverse is great in theory. You know, we get investment. I mean, maybe not so much anymore at the moment, but we've been getting investment requests for metaverse narratives for so long now. And then you go to the major metaverse platforms and they are empty. Does it mean the metaverse is dead? No, it means it's early, and the ones that are building are the ones building. Yeah. So, Karina, please go ahead.
I love the question, and I love how technology is disrupting the world of journalism. And I definitely agree with everything that you mentioned about the NFTs and about the Bored Apes and this kind of hype that was at the beginning. And I still remember that was, I think it was like 3 years ago when everyone was like super hyped over these kind of trends. And I think because we mentioned about this kind of intersection of the brands and the audience, I think that in the Web3 space, the audience and the engagement with the audience specifically, and also in the metaverse, this will be a top priority. And that's why I admire this kind of publications such as the NFT Now, or for example, the Mirror Post, the Mirror Crypto. I like the fact that content creators are more involved in creating and minting these NFTs specifically, as a sort of creating a new business and subscription model where people can definitely, the audience can definitely be more creative, can be involved. And when it comes to the metaverse, I also feel like the metaverse, it's definitely not that, but it will definitely amplify the world of journalism and content creation. And I definitely think that the storytelling part, it will just amplify also the storytelling part. And when we were talking about all these kind of elements going together and working together to create this kind of safe space, where I definitely think that AI will also enhance the content creation process. When I think about a couple of journalism that I had the pleasure to discuss with other fellow journalists, for example, in creating, I don't know if everyone is familiar also with other tech journalists, such as Sophia Smith-Gaylor, that goes also on cultural matters, not just about tech and content creation, but also the way that we will definitely want to create a safer space and definitely combat misinformation, which is a great threat when it comes to the media, any kind of media, in the Web 1 space, in a Web 2, and definitely in the Web 3. But definitely also, I like the implementation of this kind of chat box. It's probably not something that was mentioned before, about creating instead of ChatGPT, because I think that's one of the biggest threats in the media, like creating this kind of blog articles with ChatGPT and the way that it is misused. Because when I was talking to a lot of guests, that was like one of the biggest threats, like how technology is misused. But definitely, I'll suggest that working on the regulations and creating also, when it comes to these kind of platforms that the audience will be more familiar with. For example, creating these chat box. I know a couple of media outlets that they worked on this kind of chat box where definitely I think that's the information that it's provided that's very, very important. The fact that it's still accurate information and it's researched by other fellow journalists. But I'm always following this kind of media approach and what other journalists are doing. And I think that, as I was mentioning before, AI and the metaverse would definitely amplify these voices, because I'm already researching about a couple of companies such as Room 3D, or even the companies like Decentraland, where a lot of content creators are definitely engaging with their audience there. What if we could create concerts in the metaverse space, or definitely broadcasting news there, where definitely we'll have a more digital world, where we'll definitely have a different methods of storytelling and a matter of approaching our audience. And I like the fact that you mentioned this kind of brand and the gamification process, which is something that not a lot of people in the traditional media are talking about. So definitely, that's also something that I wanted to implement in my podcast. So it's definitely a source of inspiration for me. And also, last thing that I wanted to talk about was probably also the ownership, and also the fact that we're talking about the Web3 space, the smart contracts are also very relevant and very important of how people can definitely support their content. And I think this will definitely be a new innovative way of storytelling and disrupt the media outlets. So definitely I'm looking forward to collaborating with more journalists and changing this kind of space.
I think, quite honestly, Karina, thank you for what you've just added to the table. Those were beautiful, I would say, unfortunately, final words. I think we're probably going to see you guys back, you ladies, I should say, also back. Alex, you're also there. I see that Janine has also added on the table a final comment about, maybe, would you like to read it out, Gunit? Maybe some final nice last words from your end in terms of your comment.
Yeah, so I just wrote that the technology that's best for the individual is also best for society. By the way, that's not my quote. That's from, I don't remember the author, but a book that You Are Not a Gadget. So that's the quote from that book. So I just related with the Web3 because that's what I do all the time. So I think from Web3 perspective, the technology that empowers individuals with decentralized control, ownership also benefits the society at large by promoting, of course, transparency, as I initiated in my discussion, and of course, reducing centralized control and much more. That was just my last comment. And I think in terms of Web3 media, that requires, of course, accuracy of facts in the reporting. That also comes down to ethical reporting. For example, be clear about your associations, about your sponsored content. Don't hide these things and be ethical about what you are, actually reporting or bringing to the table.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for this final last words. In that regard, thank you everyone as well who have been watching, who has been engaging as well. We've seen also some comments. I couldn't show everything on screen, but I want to thank you all so much for having joined here today to speak about our connotations and what we're doing. Once more, thank you so much. Nadia, founder of Adlunum, host of the Future of NFTs podcast, of course, co-founder of the Altcoin Observer and a Web3 documentary producer. We want to ask you more questions about that next time. You won't escape from that. Then, of course, Karina, as we heard, you're a tech journalist. You produce your own podcast, Shy Tech Swiss. And of course, you're a business developer with a wonderful metaverse-related company and whatnot. Alex, we're looking forward to seeing your book being published, if I'm not mistaken, sometime next year about smart contract programming. And of course, best wishes as well for everything that you do in terms of your consultancy and your guest lecturing and everything else. Oftentimes you produce wonderful articles, I must say, also online. And of course, thank you, Gunit, as a wonderful editor, not only at the Cointelegraph, right, but also best wishes for writing your thesis for your doctorate in data science on CBDCs. And we're looking forward to seeing more books coming out from your end. So
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you all so much for having joined today. It went great. I was thrilled to meet you all, and I hope to see you soon again. Thank you for your time. We were a little bit over time. Apologies for that, but we had a wonderful group, and we couldn't let you escape any earlier. So thank you so much for your time, and